little couple of half a minute to 11 o'clock, and we'll just wait, I think, 30 seconds and then start off. I think my introduction comments are important, so I do want the maximum number of people to have logged on. Half a minute to 11 o'clock, and we'll just wait, I think, 30 seconds and then start off. I think my introduction comments are important. Is that the count here? So that I can see. Is that going to stay? That's going to stay on. Yes.
Just one poll. So before we start, we just wanted to launch one poll so that everybody can answer that. So there's a poll you can see on your screens.
Temperature is going hot. Going hot. Well, I guess it's a rainy day. The good part about a rainy day, of course, is always that everyone's at home. And then the good part about today is also that everyone can stay home. 23 days. Everyone can stay home and from a rainy day, maybe get some interesting lessons. And at the same time, get warmed up for the India-England match right after. All right, so I think we're going to start up here. I'm going to start up with some introductory comments. But just before that, I think we've got a pretty honest answer. You know, there are about 500 of you live on the class right now. And the question we asked you was, how many of you, what percentage of you think long-term, what percentage of you think short-term, and what percentage of you think a mix of both? And no surprises there, but 61% took the mixed route. Now, the problem with the mixed route, and we'll go through that in our next 90 to 120-minute class, is you need to actually identify. And I think one of the things that I'm going to talk about today and maybe lecture on is about taking the stand. And I think, therefore, it's interesting to know that 60% of you feel it's a mix of both. The problem is you'll fool yourself thinking it's a good mix of both, because balance is an important aspect of life. And therefore, it could be 20% short-term and 80% long-term, but for many of you, it could be 80% short-term and 20% long-term, but you still feel it's a mix of both. So when you say it's a mix of both, it has to be 50-50. Otherwise, you have to take a stand whether it's long-term. So no surprises, but about 35% said long-term, 5% said short-term, and 60% said a mix of both. And my concern is, that's the stand that you need to introspect. That if you had to do it again, and if I took out the question of mix of both, and I only pushed it to only 2 questions, and I want everyone to just make a quick re-rate where you don't press the 3rd option, but go back, and now there are about more than 550 of you. Just press the option of whether you think long-term or short-term, because today's class is about taking calls, being clear. So I'm going to just stop that for 1 second and just press either long-term or short-term. You can't press a mix of both. What would you do? Interesting, interesting. It's veering around 80% long-term, 20% short-term by and large. We're still waiting for another 10 seconds, but that's where I think it's heading. The only question I would ask yourselves is, are you being totally honest with yourself? Because it's a Sunday morning, you're investing time, you're going to spend 11 months with upgrad, or then look at going back to work, etc., whatever you're looking at. are you being honest with yourself? I personally can say, even with my own experience, that I can't categorically say my plans are always and usually long term. And I think my mix is actually about 50-50 a little bit. But I think here, I'm glad to hear that everyone, 72% now have said long term and 28% said short term. So keep that in mind. Are you being honest? But for the moment, I'll take that at face value that 72% of you who have joined us here are actually thinking long term. Why do we do these live lectures on weekends or whenever else we're going to do that? I personally am committed to do at least 20 such lectures a year, and this is my second one. And maybe some of you all are joining in for the second time, maybe some of you all are new people. But why does Upgrad really do these live lectures? Overall, I think your success factor for anything that you do in life is 50% the knowledge, the learning, that what we want to do. Okay. What we learn, what we absorb, go out and read, research papers, case study, the 11-month course, your university degree, if you were go doing something offline or you're doing with Upgrad online, 50% of that is going to change your life, position you well, look at your growth. The other 50% actually is attitude and mindset. I mean, the basic core of why everyone thinks education system in the country or anywhere else in the world needs to change is actually we have to first change mindsets. The mindset of whether we need to do this in this kind of a curriculum, the mindset of a curriculum, the mindset of a structured learning, the mindset of everything else. And so I thought it was important for us at Upgrad to therefore look at these additional, what we call live lectures, and expand that scope. For all of you, you might be taking a data course, a digital course, you might be getting into our MBA degrees right now, whichever one you're doing that. And there are many of you who are the alumni. These live lectures is to expand our scope of what's our attitude and what's our mindset. And most of us think we have a positive attitude, which is absolutely fine. But the word positive is not the only one. Everything we do. So when we take attributes, the last time when we had the live lecture, we talked about disruption. Today, we're talking about when to quit or when to stay the course. So if you look at that, quit is an attitude. It's an attitude. It's how you look at your perspective. Quit is your own self-decision. Because actually you think, oh, I was made to quit or whatever else. Finally, at the end of the day, your attitude, and these are the ascriptions that we want to do. And once you sort of look at that and cross that bridge, that's going to be very important. I can almost say that with certainty. Firstly, I think we've taken this title to attract people and to bring curiosity, when to quit. But today's lecture is more about staying the course, because that's the exact positive statement of what is otherwise a sort of a rallying statement or a pinching statement that says when to quit. If I have to go back and look at my own personal experience, I would say that 99% of anything and everything of my success was based on when I did not quit and when I did stay the course, for multiple reasons. And the one thing I would say at the opening comments for me is it's important for us to distinguish between when to quit and when to move on, because there is a distinction between the two. When I say don't quit or stay the course, it's not a blind thing. It's not like, okay, whatever it is, I'm going to be in a job. So that what you're telling me is that if I'm in a bad job, average job, good job, as long as I stay in this job, even though it's not a good job, if I just stay in it, success will happen. No, that's not what I'm saying. I think, therefore, it was the basis of attitude. What I am saying is the probability of success is at the highest if we stay the course and don't quit. And if you look at the quit part, there are really three things that I think go into the decision that we make when we're looking at quitting. One, conviction. Conviction, conviction, conviction. What is my conviction? What is my conviction on myself? My conviction of myself will determine when I'm going to quit and when I'm not. The second is this pre-given time limits that we have in life. Oh, I'm going to do this for 2 years. Oh, I'm going to give this a chance for 6 months. Oh, I was trying this for 3 months, it didn't work, so now I've done that. That's the other reason where quitting just happens naturally to us. We don't even think about it. So first is conviction. Second is this absolutely artificial time limits that we keep giving ourselves. First, either going in or the ultimatums that we put on ourselves, each one of ourselves, whether it's in a job, whether it's in a task, whether it's in your quarterly target, whether it's about something that your superior gave it, whether it's about even on an upgrad course, whatever it is, we always say, okay, I'll try this for 2 months, or I'll give this 2 months, or I'll give this 2 years, or this is what I want to do, or if I don't lose weight in such and such a period of time. That's the other trigger for quitting. And the third, in my opinion, is these absolutely frivolous, non-relevant external pressures that get put on us by our peers, by our parents, by our so-and-so. Everything is about, okay, decide, or somebody else. So this is not about indecision. This is about your own conviction. It's about setting those timelines, because once you set those timelines, I want to give it 2 months, then you'll do that. Now, the point is, in 2 months, you may not have an answer. You may not be able to have the conviction. You may not be able to. So I want you to start with the context that today we are looking at slowly changing attitudes from everyone, that the probability of your success in the long term is going to be very high if we can stay the course and not quit. We have to differentiate between not quitting and moving on. Yes, if something is done its time, you've given it every possible element of turning it into a success, that's when you would do that part process. So I think this is the sort of broad parameters for me. One overall comment I would still make before we start off on the 3 segments that I've started off is, like everyone has truthfully answered here and said 72% long term, you're never going to see immediate results to everything that you do. Therefore, the time limit. Therefore, your conviction. So think about it. When you're looking at anything that you're doing, whether this is the 11-month course you're doing here, if you start forming conclusions in 2 months, the biggest turnaround normally happens is when you give it the time that is required, because you cannot time success and you cannot necessarily believe that immediate results are going to be your thought process. So let's take a practical example. And for a lot of people, it will mean, I want to quit my job and go somewhere else. And my motivation is, I got a 10% raise. Yeah. Maybe the best thing you need to think about is, over a 5-year period, how do I want to see my own career, my own growth, and my own learning? If I take that as an illustration, as an example, as a case study. How do I see myself in a 5-year framework? Because I'll take a 10% increase, and I'll take another 10% increase 2 years later, because that's how the market is. And then the market plateaus or whatever else. But at the end of 5 years, if I did continue if the job is unacceptable, the company is unacceptable, we're not going to that. But most of us look at this as, that's my immediate growth. I want to move to another job, I got a 10% increase, say. You may have various different reasons, but look at the context of, I'm quitting because I'm going somewhere else. Think at that stage that if I stayed with consistency in a place for, say, 5 years, at the end of 5 years, net, would I be earning more or less? Would I have learned more or less? If the answers are no, the other one will be different, take that course. But take your time to figure out on each of these situations. When you have a question of giving yourself a timing, always pause and take a step forward. Okay, 1 year down the line or 2 years down the line, or whichever time frame you want to put, how do I see this? And you'll be able to answer a lot more questions on how important it is when you take that decision to quit. Because at that moment in time, it's a very instinctive decision and an impulsive decision. At that moment in time, it seems like the right decision. But the best way to figure out that, am I giving this my own conviction? Am I giving this the time? Am I not taking decisions based on peer pressure? 5 of my friends moved and they were doing this, so I want to do that. 5 of my friends took a course, that's what I want to do. People move from Bangalore to Delhi, that's what I want to do. How much of that peer pressure am I not succumbing to? So I want to pause there. These are some of the macro thoughts. The overall class today, I want to talk about 3 related parts. The old concept of the long-term game, risks and risk-taking. And third is overall goal setting, which I think is overrated. And we'll talk through each of those 3. I'm going to pause for 2-3 minutes if there are some quick questions right now, so we can always break that instead of me just giving this straightforward talk. Any questions there?
Yeah. So before we, while we take questions, there are also small activity that we guys want you to
Lovely.
do.
Yeah.
If you all can share one story where you waited for longer duration to see those results, and what kept you motivated without, I mean, from quitting that thing.
Yeah. So maybe we're going to pause for 60 seconds right now and give a minute for each of you to, in brief, not more than 2-3 lines, that one instance, not the whole kahani of what happened, just the one instance. Put it on the line because we want to get scores. To be clear, you need to tell us which is that one time you actually took a longer term call and took a long term view and it helped you. Take 60 seconds and put that down. And that's part of our thought provoking process.
So there are two questions around quitting. So quit is taken very negatively in India. How do we change that? Like they say, winners never quit and quitters never win.
Yeah, you don't need to change it. Don't get influenced by what people are thinking and what is the statistics for India. What is your statistics? Over the period of the next 5-10 years, what are your statistics? That's what you should be bothered about. I know you're starting with one of the 3 parameters that I put when I talked about quitting, which is this whole peer pressure, this family pressure, this everything else. So one is the statistics is not important. What is your statistics? The context here most people feel is, look, I mean, there's a lot of connotation that, look, my father and my mother may have worked much longer in jobs. Today, it's about quick gun, murugan. Yes and no, it's not a bad thing, but you need to figure out why you're doing that. As I said, if you're doing, so the context of quitting is if you don't have conviction, that's a problem because it's your conviction. And if you constantly don't have conviction, and if you're quitting on a regular basis, you need to figure out the problem does not lie with somebody else. It doesn't lie with your company, it doesn't lie with your job, doesn't lie with your spouse, doesn't lie with your cab driver, nothing. Or your idea, even if you were turning an entrepreneur. It's about your own conviction. And second is, what's the time frame you give it? So I would say that's the positive connotation, and don't worry about what the whole world thinks.
Okay. So one more question again around quitting. When do we decide to quit? People say go with the flow. If I don't see where I want to be and it's not happening, how do I handle it without feeling low or negative?
Are you giving it the best time parameter? What is it in your own confidence and conviction that's thinking and making you quit? If you can honestly answer that question to yourself, I think that's your first parameter. Write it down. And I would say write it down and wait. And 7 days later, think I'm going to write it down again. And 7 days later, what you wrote 7 days earlier sounds, and that's the same 1-line, 2-line or paragraph that you wrote as to why I'm not convinced and why I want to quit. And if it's still valid, the probability is there's a problem with your conviction or confidence, and therefore move on. Second is, have you given it that time period? Which is why I started with the fundamental situations for me was exactly those 3 elements. So have you given it the right time? You need to figure out why is your conviction low? And if my own self-confidence went up, because you might be actually shooting yourself in the foot by doing an action, whereas actually you need to first introspect. Because don't forget, the quitting over a period of time is also like an addiction. In the sense is then you just feel, yeah, and you then by the 3rd time you quit, you're justifying yourself, you're patting yourself in the back. I'm a fast mover. I don't even call myself a quitter. I go through it. I know my situation. I size it up. I don't wallow on anything else. I don't want to pause. I just keep moving on. So that's a dangerous mark. Okay, I think we're going to start the first part. But since did we get a few good, interesting sentences? Or we'll take that up a little later on.
Sure.
Yeah, while you're gathering up that. And there's lots of time for questions. So keep putting your questions online. Let's keep it specific to the topic, ladies and gentlemen. Let's keep it very specific today to the topic of what we're talking about. You know, staying the course and quitting, which I know I don't want to use that word that often because I said it's a negative word. But go back to what is our conviction, what's the time period we're giving it. So, you know, overall, it is about a long-term game. Now, for most people, you think, what does that mean? And I'm saying, it doesn't make a difference whether you change jobs every 2 years. The point is, you know, it is about a long-term game because if you can answer yourself, where do I want to be 2 years, 4 years down the line? You've taken a course for that brand. It's an 11-month course. It's a serious commitment you made here. You've obviously done it for a long-term purpose. You haven't done it because on the 11th month you're going to do it, because you may not get that immediate gratification result. But you know I'm going to be much more wiser. I'm going to be able to talk more confidently. I'll be much more knowledgeable about the topic that I want to do. And it's not something I can do earlier in my career. And I know I'll have to keep doing it again and again and again. So it is about long-term viewing. If I go back to a couple of my own cases and my own thought processes, every single time for me, it is about, if I think I'm here and if I can say that I succeeded more than I failed, and I failed 300 times, but hopefully I succeeded 330 times, and therefore my balance could be that my head is always above water. It is primarily because I gave it the chance. I went into something with the highest levels of conviction. Until my conviction level dropped, I did not give it up. And I gave it what I thought was the best time to succeed, knowing full well that mostly failure is about actually quitting. The thing is not failure. You gave it the wrong time parameter, you didn't have the conviction, and therefore there's a failure. Failure is not just one of those things where it just happens on its own. It is about the lack of your conviction combined with the lack of proper time you gave it, because you know it takes longer to do that. This is broadly, there can be always situations where something failed for a different particular reason. Long, long ago when I started cable television, it took me a year to get our first subscriber. Today, everyone knows you subscribe to Tata, Sky, DTH, Dish TV, etc., or your cable operator, or whatever else, Hathaway. So it sounds like a secondary thing. At the time in which we started it, I thought it was a brilliant idea. Like all of us who start up on anything else, whether it's not career, whether it's a job, whether it's an idea we put out in our management committee meeting, we always think it's a good idea. I thought it was a really good idea. A consumer who didn't have a remote in his hand was now being given a choice. How can I go wrong on such an idea? For a full 1 year, we got not a single customer. I'm not going to go into the analysis of what that is. The point here was, during that period of the 1 year, the number of people who told us, no, this is not an idea. I don't think India is ready for it. I don't think this is the right time. This is a very evolved scheme. The naysayers and the people who kept saying, no, this is not how it is done. This is not how it was done. And that's what it is. You sit down on a job, you sit down with your peers, you sit down with your boss, you sit down in a committee, in a conference room. There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be people saying, no. Because the best thing people can rely on is precedents. Oh, this is how it gets done. And we know that in the 21st century, precedents are getting even more irrelevant. Even more irrelevant. It really doesn't make a difference why this didn't work 3 months ago, because in 3 months later, you could have a different way to that. And in that 1 year, I could have given up at least 30 times. By that time, we had taken a staff of 30 people. All of them were questioning and looking at me for confidence every single day. And at the end of 1 year, we got 1 billion and 22 subscribers. The point I'm making was, if I didn't have the conviction that this is something that I really think will work, and every day I need to figure out how to make it work, not necessarily that it's a bad idea, not, oh God, going back and thinking nobody's taking it, there must be something wrong. Something wrong with my execution, something wrong with my perseverance, something wrong in the way we're positioning it, something wrong in the communication, something wrong in the marketing, something wrong in the way we're actually projecting that. What do I need the consumer to connect on? So that full year, what I didn't lose hope on was conviction. And what I was willing to give it was the absolute right time. That's the key. At the end of 1 year, we had 1 billion and 22 subscribers. 5 years later, it went to 1 million subscribers. I want to say after that, I moved on from cable TV, and one would say, Arey, that means you quit. No, I sold the company and I moved on from the cable TV part, because at that time, between the copyright regulation and the regulations that were how cable TV is, this thing was not something that I wanted to do. So I had a very good reason why I moved on. But I didn't quit, because from then, the entire cable TV ecosystem has happened in the overall country. And we were the absolute first people to pioneer that. But in that 1 year, if I hadn't had the conviction, and if I hadn't given it the right time, it wouldn't have happened. Take that into your life, into what you're sitting with, and see how that makes any sense of difference to you. Much later, I started home shopping in India. Now, today, most people think it's Flipkart and Amazon. But when I started it there, it was as you see it on TV. And I think many of you all still see those 4 or 5 TV channels, 24-hour TV channels that is doing home shopping. There was no 24-hour channel. We would buy time midnight onwards on every channel and started that. And somehow there again, because what excites me is starting new things and being pioneering, the big challenge about pioneering is you could be slightly before your time. And therefore you need to understand whether this is something that will stay and I'm really before my time, or I have to execute and sell the concept. And for me, cable TV was the conviction that I did. Home shopping, at the end of 1 year, I actually decided to move on because I felt at that stage the credit card penetration in the country was not there. What I thought I would go, where consumers in India wanted to, had a strong touch and feel need, and logistics was a nightmare. Home delivery of anything and paying out and getting what, at that stage, at the end of 1 year, I came to a quick conclusion that this was genuinely before its time. I questioned not my conviction, but I got the clarity that it would take another 5 to 10 years to change mindsets, consumer patterns, infrastructure and logistics, and I didn't have the financial wherewithal to do that. And therefore, I moved on from that. Did I quit that? Absolutely. Do I have any regrets? One would say, if I had taken that company today, we'd been bigger than Flipkart and Amazon put together in India. Definitely would have been. Is there any regrets? Absolutely not. Because at that time, I didn't have the tenacity to stay there 5 to 10 years before a Flipkart was even born. And during that time, I could have been bankrupt 5 times. So that's your differentiation that you need to understand. What is the long-term game you're playing? If you can put any of these into abstracts, that would be good. I'm going to pause and look at 1 or 2 stories that came out of Quit.
Okay, Ashutosh Jha posted saying that he started his company 3 years ago and hasn't seen any results. He just started seeing results last year, and everything has changed for him. Wow. So he waited for 3 years to get results.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, Ashutosh, that for many of those 3 years, you had serious doubts about it. But there must have been one thing outside of the word hope that would have got you there. And in retrospect, I can say, obviously, you felt very strongly it was your conviction, because I'm sure as every day went by, you were not getting too much of money, you were not getting that. So I think for you, what I guess was your learning was really conviction there. Another one?
So one more guy posted, I have been practicing entrepreneurship for 4 years now. And now it's getting little on my head, as I could never take a salary and afford my basic things. Have put in my money till now. I did 2 startups before this and both failed over time. Just when I think I have something interesting and I do not want to quit, but everyone else around me thinks that I should quit and take a job. I'm sure I can never be happy if I do.
Yeah. Well, I think your last line is the most important. If you're not going to be happy being out of an entrepreneurial ecosystem and taking a job, you've answered your question as to why your conviction level is to go up, why you need to stay. Now, it's easy to say that because there'll be compelling socio-economic reasons for you to not do that. As you said, you've not been able to take a salary, you're putting your own money. So and there'll be different challenging ones. But that's where it all starts up. Because if you can have that hardened approach now, you're going to have a much more probability and ratio for success in whatever you do. It may not be in this business. It could be in your 3rd business that you may finally succeed. You may fail in 2 businesses, but you stayed the course and did not quit to be an entrepreneur. So that's what you are looking at doing. But I think your last line was the most important one. And again, that's a reflection for everybody else. Am I really happy in what I'm doing? And would I be happier doing something else? Because if you can get that part also done, and people may say, I don't have the luxury for happiness because I've got a socio-economic reason. Yes, and no. Because if you're not going to be happy in a higher paid job, you're not going to necessarily be able to grow and learn as an individual. And if you're therefore not thinking long term, and then in a year's time, you'll wonder why all the negative energies have come onto you in the first place.
So one more story from Kapil Goyal. In 2011, I wanted to resign from my current job, and I was getting a good package outside, almost 50% hike. But I thought of staying the course for something better, and fortunately found the opportunity in the same company of relocating to some other country with a better pay.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are good introspection moments. And I can only say that between everything that's coming here and what each of you all will think about these three things. Constantly, you have to figure out what is my conviction level. And on a day in which you're feeling bad, write down what is it bothering you about your conviction level on what you're doing. And this is not about staying in a job and not staying in a job. It's not about being an entrepreneur or not being an entrepreneur. It's about on a day-to-day basis, your ability to take an idea. If somebody gives you an additional responsibility in the company, if you've taken on this challenge of doing an 11-month course, it's a stretch objective with upgrad. You got to give it, 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week, whatever you're giving it in that context. It's a major stretch objective. So you'll need to have a high level of conviction and you'll need to give it the time. So I think we covered the first part, which is really what I would call the long-term game approach. I gave some examples there. And I think we have a question that we want everyone to now pause and take forward when it comes to the entire long-term game, right? Or I think we've covered that. We covered that.
Yeah.
So if there are one or two more interesting stories, we can go into that.
This one question. One of the tweets of Ronnie says, if you quit once, it becomes a habit, never quit. It's a very relevant quote. How can one judge what is the right amount of risk one can take and what factors do we consider before moving on?
I think I've answered that question. Is really the factor is if you've lost conviction in yourself and in what you're doing, that's sad, but be honest about it. And definitely that's the time in which to quit. But please understand, what are you quitting? What are you quitting? When you're quitting a job, you're quitting more than your job. When you're quitting an assignment or passing on an assignment saying, no, this is not my job, small, big, whatever it is. If you're folding up on something, if you're saying no to any commitment in life, first understand, what does that mean? It's not just that, it's much, much more than that. Quitting on your job, quitting on starting a company, quitting on a peer, not taking on an assignment, not meeting a target, what does that mean? Why? It actually would boil down to exactly what I've said from the start, and that's my answer to the question. Please write down, why have you lost conviction? The probability after you write it down, and you might look at it and say, even I'm reading it and it's sounding silly after I wrote it down. It's happened to me many, many times. Whenever I write it down, the two things happen. One is after you've written it down also, 15 minutes later when I read it and say, really? This sounds quite silly. Was I really thinking that in my mind? But I can guarantee you one more thing. When I read it 7 days later, it really sounds almost 50% irrelevant. Because firstly, I've asked myself that question, and my left and my right brain is both for all of us, and we've written it down. So first, that entire realization of putting it down there and reading it, and then 7 days later, that same thought, it sounds stale almost. It sounds like, is this really a good enough reason for doing what I'm doing? So if you can actually take that and constantly look at that one single thing and write down and validate that, that would be huge. And second is, again, are you giving it enough time? So let's move on to risks, which is the second part of what we want to talk about today. I think for most people, and I think we've got some questions at the end, is, what are the risks? And I think the last question also appeared to that at the end that says, what are the kind of risks we should take in that? I mean, when you're looking at quitting, what you're saying therefore is, I don't want to take the risks. Almost everyone in any context in your day-to-day activity is you're going to take risks. The reason you're doing an upgrade course is because you want to have that better sense of clarity and your ability to talk to peers, your boss, and everyone else. So what is the risk that every time you walk into a conference room and a part of a meeting of 7 peers, 14 peers, or whatever else, you never speak up? Maybe because of your lack of conviction, maybe because of your lack of confidence. In most companies, and I've been part and parcel of that, and when we have our review meetings and whatever else we were doing in our past companies and our present companies, this word firefighting comes up a lot, where you feel, no, that's the difference between this long-term and short-term thinking. I'm so obsessed and compelled that I need to solve today's problems that I'm not thinking about tomorrow. But the problem is even more complex, because the more you try and solve the problem of the immediate nature without thinking that tomorrow, how will I do it differently? The risks are manifold. one, you're burning out because then you feel I'm doing the same thing. It was your job to actually try and solve this a little bit better. Whenever you're firefighting, the first thing you need to do is pause and say, I've got to take 20% of my time or 30% of my time and increase my pre-planning. Because actually, what is the one single thing when everyone thinks for firefighting? They feel it's not in my control. I've been given pressure. I've been given tasks. I've been given a job. I've been given unreasonable deadlines, so I'm firefighting. Or there are not enough people in this job. They're not competent people, so I'm firefighting. But actually, it means you are in whatever job you are in. It's your onus. What is your level of pre-planning? Pre-planning, not just planning, but pre-planning. Pre-planning is one step before planning, and normally planning is on the run. And therefore, it becomes firefighting. You're planning, but you're executing while you're planning. No. What do I need to do to prepare before I do that? And you may say, I don't have the luxury. But I think that's a problem. Because everyone does have the luxury. Because if you really want your performance to go to that next level, you'll have to be able to push that to that extent. And so therefore, for me, the entire ability of taking risks is an important criterion of how we evaluate about not quitting. I gave this as an example, but I'm saying in every single aspect of what we're doing, that is pretty much where that goes there. What I'm going to now pause is just take broad questions.
So there are a lot of questions around time management.
Yeah.
So how do you manage multiple things and not quit on ones which you feel are important, and how to manage different things at a single time? For example, the upgrade course itself, like while you're working, how do you manage the course?
Yeah, so let's take that as a good example, that I have a full-time job, and now I have taken on an extracurricular activity or a hobby, or exactly this upgrade course. Now, the fact of the matter is, how do you balance that? You've already made that choice. You made that choice that in my present being, I don't necessarily believe that I can grow or learn, or I'm not growing satisfactorily, I'm not learning satisfactorily, and therefore I need to add. So when you're looking at that, at the end of the day, you are looking at what is my focus. The focus is that you have taken it that I'm going to spend another 10 hours. It's going to compromise from something. It may compromise mostly from your approach to firefighting or your ability to always look at things short term. So you've taken that decision that I want to add there and go forward. And I think that's really what is resonating for you. Multitasking is not that good. Not everyone can multitask. So there are two parts to this question. One is, how do I multitask? Not everyone is good at multitasking. In fact, most people are very poor at multitasking. So if you are multitasking, you have to first figure out, am I really good at it? And if I'm good at it, demonstrate it in 2 or 3 things. If you're multitasking with 3 things, narrow it down to 2 and figure out, am I really good at those? Because otherwise, we all think, yes, we can have multi. And anyway, let's be clear, with all the technological interference that we have, even when you're doing one thing today in the 21st century, you are multitasking, because 2 to 3 hours you're spending on what you think you need to stay in touch with the social media, your mails, with people, answer a WhatsApp, everything's on demand according to you. I have to answer that, you don't. So I think in any case, we're multitasking. Look at the amount of time. And for me, what works is, when on a day on which I feel stretched about multitasking, and I do believe that I enjoy to a certain extent multitasking, but when I'm stressed, I pause and I figure out what are the 2 or 3 things I want to just get out of the system. And if I can go last 7 days and figure out, this is the time I was spending on this, this, and this. Okay, these 3 things I'm going to spend less time on. That makes an incredible difference, and then you evolve. It's not one of those things where you can only cast it in stone. But whatever they may be, commute time, time on the phone, this constantly being on demand, being distracted with meetings, or being into peer pressure, where you'll have to figure out your time. But first, understand it's not that easy. In fact, it's very difficult to multitask. And ability to succeed when you're multitasking is low, because you're not giving full attention to any one thing.
There are 2 questions around mapping capabilities to individuals. Like, for example, how do we assess ourselves and understand what best suits us from a career perspective?
Yeah, I think it depends, what suits you. I think it depends on what stage of your career you would be in, right? I mean, obviously, if you're at that early stage in your career, you're still discovering what your core strengths are. A lot of this actually is based on feedback that you get from people. So I would say first, normally my thing is, write down what you think are your strengths. No, I think you're working in a working environment, all of you are working professionals. Try and pick up as much feedback, because what you think are your strengths and weaknesses may be one thing, but what your peers who are working with you, not some casual friend who just says it. If you've got some peers, your boss or anyone else, or even your past employment, if you can pick up and invite feedback, that's your best way if you want to course correct on where you want to go. You need to get that feedback. Go out there and pick up that feedback, because you will need that as you go forward. So one is, structured feedback for you to be able to figure out and write that down, and then see how your evolution process goes.
Okay. So one more follow-up question about planning. Although there are pre-planned tasks would be inline, when intervened with the new goals, how to manage a pre-planned task?
The good thing, really, I want to tell you, the good thing about pre-planning is if you spend 1 hour, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, and most people actually spend 3 to 4 months on anything before you can pre-plan. We're launching a course, the pre-planning for us, before we figure out what the course is 6 months. The most important element is pre-planning is not about all the steps and going forward. It's about the time you spend about, now I'm going to pause, and part of my pre-planning is, okay, guys, next 5 days, we're going to write down everything that can go wrong. If we haven't put onto our pre-planning the context of notes on what all can go wrong, you haven't simulated yourself for pre-planning. Then it's not pre-planning in that context. So when somebody, when in space research, or if ISRO was doing something, the level of pre-planning is many of the what ifs, many of the 99 things that will go wrong that will not be in my control. And if I start, that's the level of pre-planning. It can happen and should happen in almost everything else. Are you questioning yourself a lot more on what are the things that can go wrong? That's the level of pre-planning. If you cover that level of pre-planning, your ability to then take on an additional task is very good. You would not look at it as a stretch objective. You can easily fit it because you're well prepared here. The problem when we get into stretch mode is that we got one thing, we think we've done a lot of pre-planning and we're prepared, and then we take on this additional one, and then things start going wrong here. That's when you feel you have maximum time pressure. That's when you feel you can't multitask. That's when you feel the most stressed. If this one, which is your core, has been substantially thought through, if I've pre-planned on something, when somebody comes and starts giving me bad news, I'm reacting it in a very calm manner. And a lot of people ask me, how come you're so calm? I'm saying, actually, I thought this thing through for the last 6 months. And I'm one of those people who look at disaster planning situations. So the what ifs should come in your mind as a leader, as a manager all the time. Because once you have the what ifs asked, even when your juniors, your superiors, or boss come and say, yeah, because I've thought that thing through. It's played in my mind. This could have happened, this could have happened, this could have happened, and I have that. The minute I have a comfort on that, the other goes into a very different level of wavelength.
So there's one more question. During your rebuilding phase, if there's a personal emergency which has taken you till your core, how to be able to get on track, because the event has taken most precious to you, which is your time and emotion?
Yeah, this is a very individual matter. I'm not sure I can answer it. I can only answer it in the first person and not in the third person. That what would I do? If it's taken a huge toll on me for whatever reason, I would pause. I would pause, because you could be making even more mistakes and digging yourself further into the ground on anything that you're doing in your life, in your career, in your job, in your business, in your entrepreneurship, whatever it may be. It'll only go down more because you're not in a stable state. So difficult as that may be, actually stopping and finishing that chapter off, or the catharsis off, or your ability to be able to recover from that emotional thing is going to be very important. Because otherwise what will happen is you won't have gotten out of that. The minute you give it, everything else has stopped and only this, you suddenly figure out, my God, I have to get out of this, because now I'm in this entire phase of is going spiraling downhill because everything else has stopped. But that's a hard call that I would make, is I would stop. I would be able to deal with that entire situation and say, I can't deal with anything else. It forces me to finish that off in some form or the other, however difficult it may be. But I also know that if I don't do that, it's going to constantly suffer with everything else. And then I'll spend even longer because I'll never get over this emotional stress. And the problems that I've created with bad decisions on the other part are going to continue.
So there are two questions around priorities and saying no. So how do we cultivate habit of saying no in professional or personal life, and how do you deal with process of saying no every day?
Yeah, actually, it's one of my favorite questions. I was having a long discussion with somebody else last night, in fact, who was having a conversation about, how do you take your choices and how do you make your choices and how do you figure out between one and the other? It was an interesting conversation. My first answer was, I've developed the knack and the luxury of saying no. The consequence of that is actually quite liberating. And for most people, we look at saying no as, oh God, it's a lost opportunity. Am I saying no to the wrong thing? But if you start preparing yourself that actually it's a liberating thought, it just makes your choices of whatever you do at whatever stage you are in and however tough it may be, financial, family, job, critical, mix of both, I need to do this, but I need to do that. All of that will get sorted out in a very different manner. And if you look at saying no as what I would call a liberating process, which means how do I get myself in a position, and this was a young gentleman and he was having a conversation and he was saying, I've just finished this thing and I'm wondering whether my parents tell me that I should go do my MBA rather than start working because then I'll have more opportunities and therefore will be able to say no to more job opportunities. And I kind of thought about that and I kind of smiled and I said, I'm not sure at this stage that's necessarily your right answer there because to do that, I'm not sure you're creating more opportunities to be able to say no. But today, I think in whatever you're doing, evaluate and answer what your strengths are and then figure that out. But I think if you can get yourself, it's a tough one. And this is not about no or yes when somebody on a job that you're taking. This is about inside the works that you're doing there. If you are doing a job well, the most important thing to say no to when your boss or your peer comes and says, can you also do this? Now, if you think it's for your personal learning and if you think it's part of the teamwork and you need to do that, you'll have to balance that out. But today, I think one of the most difficult things to do is to say no, but one of the most important things to do is to say no, because you're actually fine-tuning choices, the choices you're going to make. What are your best parameters as we learn and grow, not general knowledge, not what Trump did and what Modi did, and therefore what is history today. It's about myself, because your best learning, you can reflect on yourself. You'll take a lot of external situations, but you look at it in yourself. And in that yourself, this will be the turning point where what are the choices I'm making? The better choices I'm making in life as I grow in whatever case, the peer pressure to job, to assignment, to target, to changing jobs, to starting a business. If I can improve the way I can determine my choices, then the probability of you being learning and on a high growth path is very high.
So there are a lot of questions around people wanting to quit jobs to do either something they like or for better opportunities. Most of them want to know what is the right signal when they need to realize that they have to quit that job.
The first thing I can guarantee you with authority and experience is the signal is never going to come from the outside. If you're waiting at a crossroad or at into inverted commas, traffic signal for somebody else to see whether it's yellow, red, or green, it's not happening. And if you're hoping somebody can give you that answer, it's a recipe for disaster because no other person can guide you on that. So firstly, you need to, and I assume, and I think you all know that the signal can't be external circumstances. The signal has to be something internal. And I think one of the questions that came in earlier where somebody said a lot, and then he said at the end, I'm here, I'm in my job, 3 years, I failed into whatever it is, but I'm not going to be happy taking on a job. So if you ask me today, that's your signal, that's his signal today. His signal is, I'm just not going to be happy taking on a job. So if that's, what's your non-negotiable is what you'll have to figure out in your mind. What is non-negotiable for you is really what's going to make the difference. So the signal is when you're looking at situations, if you can write down that low element of like, this is fine, these are the pros, this is the cons, this is my SWOT analysis, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. This is what will happen if I change a job. But what is non-negotiable? Like this one, no. Somebody can look at it as ethics and integrity. Somebody can look at it as various different things that can get them to do that. So I would say if you can define for yourself, what is that bottom line of this is non-negotiable. For some people it can be money, for some people it can be happiness, for some people it can be challenge of a job, some people they want to prove themselves to somebody, multiple situations. Get down to that one basic. Yeah.
So we'll take a quick pause and launch the poll around risk.
Lovely. Yeah, this is an important, simple question, but a pretty important and distinct question. So take a look at this. What we're asking you is, what according to you from the following list, what one thing stops you from taking risks? Uncertainty, fear of loss, or criticism? I think we've discussed a fair amount of that right now. So just press the button, and I'm going to then, see for most of you all where that lands, and then also talk about each of these three situations. Yeah, go for it. What, according to you, from the following list stops you from taking decisions? Is it uncertainty? Is it fear of loss or fear of failure, as the case may be? Or is it criticism? All right, so I think where we're landing broadly, I'm going to give it maybe another 20 seconds while everyone's pressing the pause. Pick one: uncertainty, fear of failure, criticism. All right, I think we're kind of stabilizing to, 55%, which is a majority, have said uncertainty. I don't know. The whole question of I don't know. But a pretty high percentage of, so it's now changed a little bit, but 50% have said uncertainty, and I'd say 40% are saying fear of failure, and 10% broadly are saying criticism. For that 10%, let's deal with each of these three. And I'd say that I'll deal with the easiest first, which is criticism. You're wasting your time, is all I would say. If there's any advice I want to give you on a Sunday morning, who cares? If you're not your best critic, you're wasting your time. It doesn't make a difference what other people think. Because, that's how you're going to be, if you want to be driven. Of course, you want peer pressure. Of course, in your job, you want compliments. Of course, you want people to celebrate with you on success. Of course, you want feedback. But you are your best critic. So criticism cannot slow anyone down. Then you need to take stock on that. So I would say the 10% of you who said criticism is stopping you from taking risks. Please introspect, because you are being guided by external forces and not your own. The 40% therefore was fear of failure. Very human, very natural. It's actually what stops so many situations across the day. Because actually, in a sense, if you look at it, uncertainty and fear of failure is also quite common. Because uncertainty is fear of the unknown. Failure is also fear of the unknown. It's like, I don't know whether I'll succeed. Therefore, the assumption is, since I can't know whether I'm going to succeed, I'm going to fail. There's one word that I started the whole class with, which was conviction, and your internal conviction. If I have conviction, criticism plays no role in my life. Zero role. I really don't give a damn if anyone had a point of view, because I have to be my best critic. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be a great listener. I will take criticism. You must take criticism. It can't stop you. So please understand that criticism is good. If you are not taking criticism, that's a bad idea. So please take all the feedback. And you must take constant criticism. But it can't stop you from taking risks. That's what this question was about. That's what this class is about. Fear of loss, uncertainty. So basically, we're talking about 90% of everyone feels fear of the unknown. Well, guess what? What are you going to do about it? Do you actually think that you're going to have an answer of what is going to be playing out forward? No. The shortcut we take in India is to go to astrologers or change our Vastu and our Feng Shui and do all the other extraneous situations that feel, oh, I need that support. And somebody maybe can tell you, will I succeed or not? And I'm thinking, really? If your Jyotish were to tell you, thumbs up, you really go for it? I wouldn't. Because that's 10 times more risky. Because now you've got a false sense of confidence and conviction. My Jyotish told me everything's going to be fine. What happens? False sense of confidence. Your ability, therefore, of pre-planning, the intensity with which you need to, what is pre-planning? Pre-planning, and I think we discussed what pre-planning is, but what is the effect of pre-planning? The more I pre-plan, the more I answer questions of what can go wrong, the more I'm increasing my own conviction. I'm using this word conviction because that's very important, because confidence and conviction, you can conquer the world. You can win lots of stuff. You can overcome failures. You can stay the course. You can do so many things. You can talk back to somebody. You can stand for what you want to stand for. If you have your self-confidence and self-conviction, that is the most important. Pre-planning is helping your conviction, because the more I pre-plan and the more I answer, then I'm feeling confident. For the last 2 months, I've been working on this. I've answered so many questions. I've dealt with the best way actually to deal with unknown is to ask those questions. And therefore, to me, what works best, and the reason I don't feel a fear of failure, number one, I don't feel the fear of failure for a couple of reasons. One is obviously I don't care what anyone else thinks when I fail, which is half the reason why most people don't start it, because they feel, oh, my parents, my spouse, people that mean to me, forget about the outside, or anyone else on social media will say I'm going to fail. Well, you don't have a choice. You're never going to be able to answer that question. But pre-planning allows me to gain that conviction, and pre-planning allows me to look at all the questions and all the uncertainty. Because if you've got uncertainty, the only solution to that is, again, write down all the questions that are buzzing in your mind and the what ifs. Try and find answers. And the best recipe for that is force yourself to first. Putting an exhaustive list of questions is a very difficult thing. It's something that you have to be very honest about and ask those questions. What is every single thing that's bothering me, that's leading to uncertainty, or my fear of the unknown, which is the fear of failure? Write down those questions, improve on those questions, then try and do answers, and then always take that pause. What has worked for me is writing it down, the questions, and you can put it down anyway. You can put it on your mobile phone, put it on a piece of paper, throw it up, whatever you want to do. Just keep adding. For a week, keep adding. What are the things that are stopping me in my job, with my thing, whether I'm taking a decision to change there, whether I'm taking a decision to start with upgrade? What is that 5, 7, 3 things that are constantly giving you? What is your answer? And then systematically try and answer those questions in a very peaceful manner. And then go back to them after 2 days, 3 days, 7 days. You will find an evolution where all I can tell you is, if you try that exercise, your level of uncertainty will keep coming down. Your level of uncertainty comes down. Your level of fear of the unknown and fear of failure also keeps coming. And that's the best way I can answer this question. And it was an interesting poll because it was supposed to be thought-provoking for all of you all, for us to be able to take that way forward. All right, we're doing well on time. We're at 60 minutes. We've got 30 minutes more. I want to cover one single element of goal setting, but I think we're on a good wicket here. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah. So before taking a couple of questions, we want you to do small activity. Can you give one example of any risk you never took because of the uncertainty you faced?
Yeah, and good. And we'll share 4 or 5 quick ones. Take a minute or 2 minutes maximum. We're going to pause. And again, if you want to just repeat the question, state the one risk you did not take or one decision you did not make. That
Because of the uncertainty.
Because of your fear of failure, uncertainty, or threat of criticism. I'm going to take a voice break for 60 seconds and not talk till we're doing that. Put it on mute. Put it on mute. All right. And look, I think some of you all are facing an echo issue, is what I've been given as feedback. I'm sorry about that. And we try and improve on that on future ones. And maybe, next time log on maybe 4 or 5 minutes before and give us that feedback so we can do that. I've tried to speak as articulately as I possibly can, and hopefully enunciating my words so that even that will be clarity. But if there is an echo issue, then there's an echo issue. But I think we should keep going. It's been an hour, and any comments?
There's a question. If you could give, it would be great if you kindly give us an insight of the vast experience that you have from media and entertainment industry pertaining to conviction and risk. As we all know that this industry is high risk, high impact sector.
Many risks, many industries now in the service industry, I have to tell you, are high risk, high, given where the mad funding that is happening to sectors, to me, those are even more higher risk because there's no logic to the level of the funds that are being raised and the level of which how they're going to be spent and whatever else. But specifically in media and entertainment, I have to say, I have to come back to the two things that have stood, or three things that we've talked about today that have stood me in good stance. One, conviction, my own conviction, always. And I think from the early stages when I started cable TV, when I didn't know what a business was starting about, I don't know. Today I can say it's conviction. At that stage, it could have been madness for everyone who was concerned. But that madness translated into conviction. So it's not that I sat down one fine day, I wasn't mature enough, I was all of 22. And all I can say is at that stage, what I now can say in retrospect was conviction is that that stage could have been to most people mean, you're mad. Yes. But if you really want to get going, somebody needs to call you mad. A lot of people need to call you and say, the more people say you're mad, it actually excites me because of the simple reason that obviously that I'm thinking differently. I'm not taking things for granted. I'm not going far as far as that is concerned. So I think that second for me is always in good stead is pre-planning. And the 50% of that pre-planning for me is the time I spend on all the things that can go wrong. And if I can spend almost 50% of my time on what I think is, okay, these are all the things that I need to do. Now, these are all the things that I want to go with the what if that's made a big difference. And third is my own sense of what choice do I have? Because normally when you come to a crossroad on risks, if you feel this is the reason why I'm doing that, I'm not giving myself a time parameter. I need to succeed. I don't have a choice in that. Then you'll be able to take it in a very different manner.
So there's one more question. How to handle age-based discrimination for new employment opportunity?
What?
Age-based discrimination.
Age-based discrimination. Okay.
Which is not uncommon yet not spoken about.
Yeah, no, well, I think it's not uncommon, but it is getting spoken about. I mean, I think you need to be clear you're an obviously the organization, I don't think organizations have too much of prejudice today. Even the biggest and deepest of organizations and multinationals all have a hiring habit, a mandate that says, if I want to be if I'm going to reach the digital consumer, if I'm going to reach them digitally, I need to find people in that consumer space. So one thing is for sure, I think that there will be very few organizations and companies that have a prejudice to this. The probability is that it's not well communicated within the organization. And therefore your immediate boss may feel, I'm 40, you're 28, what do you know that I don't know? I've got 12 more years experience for you. Yes, that attitude, which is a wrong attitude, may come about. Now, you have to figure out how you can penetrate that. You have to penetrate that with your boss. You'll have to figure out with him. That doesn't necessarily mean antagonizing. Now, if the person is constantly saying that, maybe you want to ignore that with your superior at that particular point and just stop getting irritated with that thought process. But the kind of value add that you give him, if he realizes that, wow, you are making him also look smart and you're giving him those answers, at some stage he's going to stop saying, you're 28 and what do you know? Because the point of the matter is you're not behaving that. You're giving ideas that he didn't have. And at some stage, the penny will drop. But companies don't have this prejudice normally. Second, obviously, is try and go one level. In most companies, whether they're startups or whatever, whether they're 300 people or 900 people, I think today more than ever before, access to CEO is becoming, or access to the leader, or access to the top management team is becoming easier for most people. And people are listening there. So, and I'm not talking about anonymous mail or a knock on the door, but whatever it takes you to go to somebody else who can be a listener and says, I don't want to be critical in this organization, but you hired me for my bright ideas. Stop reminding me every day by telling me I don't have the work experience for that thought process because here's what I'm behaving. The third I would say is introspect, that what you're saying, you may think is smart, but how you're saying it may not be matching up. And because of that, there's a gap. So I think that would be the other part that you would need to introspect, that you may be saying it's smart, this thing, but how you say it may come across immaturely, and therefore showing that I have age experience, and therefore you might be getting that criticism. But today, if you want to fix that, I think organizations are very clear that looking for this, age is not a barrier for great ideas. So break it in whichever way you can. One more question, go to the last segment.
So what is your experience of unlearning consciously and deliberate learning practice to learn something new?
Yeah, it's a very good question. What is everyone's discipline of unlearning? And I think that happens half the time. I mean, you'll finish your 11-month course with upgrad, or you'll finish your 2-year MBA degree, and frankly, there is that reservoir. You'll get a lot of information, and then you will have to unlearn. And I think today, one of my first questions I'm having was someone who's just straight out of a management school. Firstly, hopefully that he or she would have done 3-4 years of previous experience, but I'm still hiring. It will be, okay, list out the 4 things you're going to unlearn when you get into the job. That's one. That's when you're coming from a level of education. But I think in almost every single element of the companies that we are running or I'm involved with, what's helped me is stopping people who constantly quote precedents. Precedents are important. Data is important. History is important. But the most important is putting it into context. So just telling me, oh, this is how it gets done, just will not work. And I think that's the most important part where you need to do that. Take the last learnings of what happened over the, this has been happening over the last, these are the trends, this is what's happening. Now, today, what's happening? So being able to extrapolate that and stopping people from hanging on to precedents is one of the biggest things that, to me, makes this a very different experience. And therefore, unlearning for me is taking precedents, putting them into today's perspective. That would be my clear answer.
So we have one more poll before we jump into the third section.
Sure. All right. I think everyone's getting a little weary of the polls, so this will be the last poll, don't worry. But how often do you consume content from Upgrad? Now, that could be a quick one. Almost every day, weekends, based on availability of time. Hopefully, I hope nobody's going to say based on availability of time, but go ahead, answer the question. Almost every day, weekend, and based on available time. Okay, there's a quick one, so we can move on from there. But okay, the quick poll here, broadly, I would say is that 60% are saying every day, 20% are saying weekends, and 20% broadly is saying based on availability of time. Okay, that's just to introspect with everyone. Just in case, for all of you who felt, am I the only nutcase who's doing this every day? Well, 60% of you doing it in any case. And for every one of you who is worrying about, I'm only doing it on weekends, you've got a small company because the majority of people are doing it every single day. Each one to their own as far as that is concerned, but that's that. So last segment quickly, because we got about 20 minutes left on this, was the context of goal setting. And this again is part of the whole context of staying the course and quitting. And I think there, overall, our notes would be as follows, because goal setting, a little bit of what we talked about today, which is planning and pre-planning. The problem today with goal setting is there's 99% goal setting and 1% pre-planning. Because everyone thinks when I set my goal, that's it. I spend days and weeks and offsites for goal setting. And I'm saying, hello, but can we spend disproportionate time on the planning? Because the goal setting is a statement. The goal setting is, okay, you've come through that, you've said that, a lot of people got in the room, and then you've stated an ambition, you've stated a goal. Of course, you've broken that down, that says, okay, I'll meet this. But the problem today is that a lot of what we do is goal setting versus equal amount of time. I would not even say equal amount of time. More amount of time on pre-planning once you set your goal. So goal setting is overrated because without the rigor of pre-planning, no goal is set. It's a notional thing. It's like a vision statement. It's 40 people in a room, an offsite, you come up with that, put it on the glass, on the mirror right outside your reception in offices, put it on your website, and that's it. After that, it's all downhill. So that would be my first thing, that introspect, that when you're setting a goal, and this is not just organizations. Now let's come to each of you. What does it mean for you individually when you're setting your goals? How much of that have you answered all the other questions? Because otherwise it'll be just goal setting without necessarily the planning of that. And I think the upgrade team here has come up with a clear-cut formula of 4 alphabets, which read as SMART, S-M-A-R-T, which they believe is a good framework for all of us to look at when we're looking at overall the ability for us to be able to do that. So 1 is S of the SMART, which is small wins. Okay. And I think some of you all have answered that question also today when we've asked that. It says, I tried this, and whatever else. And there have been some interesting ones, but I think, there was Karandeep who actually we asked him on a certain amount of thing. And I think one of the first things he said is, solving a few programs every week helped me gain proficiency in the language. I think Madhusudan said, finishing the quizzes, going over the code at the end of the day, reading the notes, small things but help me. When we're talking about this word pre-planning, I think one word that sticks in my mind, maybe that I didn't talk about earlier, is the word revision. And I think revision is an important word when we're talking about doing our courses and upgrade, because otherwise you're constantly on this conveyor belt or on this treadmill that this thing, then you go to the next deadline. The question today is, if you really want to do that, how much are we revising? I know in school they taught us, okay, now let's revise a chapter, but now that sounds like a distant part. But in real life today, in your job, revision is an important aspect. Exactly what I said. I write down something and I look at it 7 days later. Now that to me is revision. I'm going back and revalidating and revising myself. So what is the element of revision that's also coming into whatever else is important? So I think SMART is A, small wins, B, mini habits. We can't overnight change our approach to anything else. But what are the 1 or 2 things? Maybe it's this weekend to weekdays. Maybe I was trying to do it on your weekends, but I never get time on weekdays. And if I just figure out that 1 or 2 days, whatever that may be, mini habits to change a little bit of the rituals. Third is A in the SMART, which is alignment. What sort of identity do you aspire to and what is your association with that? The fourth is record and revise, which is what I spoke about today. Revise is going to be a very, very important part. And T is test. How are you learning? How are you learning? How are you learning on that? And I know for a lot of you all, the feedback that I get a lot when we're talking to is, the first 2 months are really tough. Obviously, they're tough because and the way you can break that up is if I have small wins, if I change some of the habits, because this is a stretch objective, if I can align why I'm doing this, constantly remind yourself why you're taking this. Okay. And you'll have to get off that treadmill often to be able to revise. And lastly, how are you testing and how are you learning? That barometer only you can talk about. So I think, just to summarize, and then I'm going to open it up for the next 12 minutes for a balanced amount of questions so we can end the session. We've talked about why we're doing these overall, and I think it's about changing attitudes and mindsets. Number 2, that I believe that 50% of whatever we're going to learn, if we're not changing our own attitude and our own mindset to whatever we do, knowledge is going to play that much of a role in your career growth and what you're learning, whether you quit a job, move a job, whatever it is. Quitting is a negative connotation, but you need to know sometimes when you need to move on. But the best way to figure out on the 3 things is, what is my level of conviction? If your conviction is low, you're going to keep constantly be a quitter. You have to improve your level of conviction. 2, are you giving it enough time? And 3rd, stop getting into pressure from anybody else of what they think about you. Only you can be your best one as far as that's concerned. And then we talked about long-term gains, we talked about risks, and we talked about overall goals, and most important, pre-planning and a little bit of revision. So I think that's how I can summarize this session here today. And maybe I'll take a few questions before we wind up, because I think the India-Pakistan toss will start, India-England toss will start pretty soon.
So guys, a quick note. So we posted a link to the sheet, practice sheet in the chat box. You can all use that for better planning.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions.
Yeah. How to overcome anxiety, emotional pressure, and not able to get into a job after months of completing the course? How to focus when you feel like you're stuck in a downward spiral, when your expectation from the job placement from upgrad seems not working, when not able to get many interviews from the for data science roles as a
I want to state here, and one of the complaints we have on the other side is actually the kind of proactiveness that our team has in upgrad. So the ability and job opportunities and the interviews lined up is huge. And we find that actually sometimes even disappointing when people are not, you've done this, invested time, but don't have the discipline to take each of those opportunities. Then you start cherry picking and doing whatever else. So this was just a broad comment, doesn't answer the question here. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't think I can sit here and give you how you're going to be able to charge up your emotional pressure. I think you took a very bold step in understanding that your requirement in whatever job you are in or whatever not, that you needed to augment your skill sets in your specialization, whether it's in data, digital, or whatever else you're doing with upgrad. So that's a positive one. I can't sit here and say be patient, but you need to figure out what is not happening. You cannot have done a course of this nature and not have job opportunities. Are you having different expectations? Or are you going and taking those interviews? How many interviews have you actually taken that upgrades? So first, if you go back to your counselor or anybody else and first analyze what's my opportunity and have I got those? Two, if for any reason, then your soft skills could be in question here. And that's why you're feeling a little bit more exasperated. That because a lot of feedback we get is, look, super smart, much more knowledgeable, but I need communication skills. I need people who are going to think, not only with theoretical knowledge. Now, there's that much there, and therefore, today's class and many other classes like that. Are your ability to be able to communicate and hold your own in an interview? So I would suggest that you go back, even talk to your counselor, and tell him these are my problems. I've had these interviews, or I've had no interviews, so give me more, or I have these interviews, and therefore, can you help me with my soft skills? Can you help me with getting through an interview? We've got now specialized classes in your course with nothing extra for us to be able to tell you how do you go through with an interview and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So next question is around what is the role of morality in all the growth roadmap?
Morality is always very high. People mix up ethics and integrity with only honesty, and you look at it only. For everybody, morality is about telling lies or truths, black and white, or embezzlement and stealing. Integrity is not about that. Integrity is a lot more than taking 10 rupees from somebody else's wallet or drawer. Integrity is first being honest to yourself. If you can get that parameter, that if I'm fooling myself, I'm fooling the whole world, and I'm not going to go anywhere else, then the whole definition of integrity, morality, ethics has a different spin altogether, because then you set a benchmark. If I'm constantly fibbing with people, the integrity, first I need to be honest myself, then I need to be honest with my colleagues and everyone else, my peer, my family, everything else. If you can get those right, everything in your work environment will go through a sea change of that, because then your expectation will be real. You won't be a bullshitter. You won't accept a false target, nor will you give one. You won't want to rule for the day, because that's your short-termness. Aaj bol diya, fir dekhte hain. That's a lack of integrity. So I think morality, integrity is a very important part, but don't mix it up as lying and truth only and stealing. It's a lot more than that. And first is how clearly, brutally honest am I being to myself? Last two questions.
Yeah. So I believe in small and realistic goals, or divide and conquer algorithm. Does that align with a long-term goal attitude?
It will align to your long-term goal attitude. Firstly, it has to be your long-term. It can't be your sisters, your brothers, your wives, your sons, your dads, your moms, nobody's. You have to set your own goals. So don't look for endorsement for that. And yes, if that's your mixture, it will. And the only thing I would tell you is, rest assured, it will change and evolve. If you get right what you're doing here, it can't stay constant. You'll find a new parameter and a new benchmark for that. But go with what you got there, because that's the conviction you want to go with. Last question.
So we generally get diverted more often. What are the good practices that can lead to a focused life, professional career, and stick to the goals that we plan?
It's really very difficult. All I can tell you is you're in good or bad company, whichever you look at it, because I would say 99% of us keep talking about willpower and focus, but we don't practice it. I can't say with clear conviction that I practice it in that sense. Yes, we get focused, defocused all the time. So it's a problem. I think the only way I can answer that question is twofold. How badly do you want to change it? Because I found that if I want to do something badly on one or two, and the second one is some of the things we spoke about here in our smart thing also was quick wins. Don't try and change too many things at one time. Think of one or two things. Either it's the habit, either it's the time, the 1 hour to meditation or whatever else, or my alone time, or my thinking time, or strategy time, or exercising time, or work time. Or the time I'm not going to devote and get distracted with the technological things that do that. Think of whatever it is that you need to do, because you'll have to make that one or two steps. It's like I have 5 focuses, but if I think losing 5 kilos, it's just going to take that level of confidence by saying, I did it. You know, it's like when you look at sports, the reason that excelling in the adrenaline that comes into, if any of you play sports, which I think everyone should, because it teaches you so many life lessons as far as that's concerned. That adrenaline of I did it, or I made that win. At that point in time, you know, there's so much going on in your mind and your body. And I think that's really the shifting part there. So on that positive note, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you very much. It's been a really large gathering. Many of you all have stayed on. I'm sorry for some of you all who had to drop off because of echo and audio reasons, and we'll try and rehearse that for the future. But, you know, these are large classes. We've got, you know, 500 people that logged on at any given time, and we'll keep improving. Thanks, and have a good Sunday.